howdy, friends. Welcome to Americana Station. I'm Emily Smith, filling in for Will Payne Harrison and India Ramey today. And my guest, well, she could be considered a living legend. The things she's accomplished in her life and the way she's lived it are certainly impressive and honestly worthy of a memoir, which is why she's working on one, of course. Her name is Paula Boggs, and her new album, Janus, is a bit of a memoir as well. Each song on this new album is a personal and passionate essay about life, her family, history, and more. The stories are given life with her unique voice and delivery, and punctuated with the amazing lineup of musicians that accompany her and form the Paula Boggs Band. They've been making a name for themselves in the Pacific Northwest for quite some time, and if they're new to your ears, I hope you'll take the time to really dive into this new album, Janus, which is out on April 1st. On today's interview, we'll discuss some tracks on the album, as well as Paula's story, which it's like Forrest Gump. There's so many cool things that she's done. She has a decorated military career. She was one of the first women to earn airborne wings and a congressional appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy. She was chief legal officer and executive vice president and board secretary for Starbucks, and served on President Obama's committee on the arts and humanities. And that's just scratching the surface. There's so much more. This wealth of knowledge and passion for life is heard in her music. So let's dive in now and get to know Paula a little more. Emily Smith here on Americana Station podcast with Paula Boggs of Paula Boggs Band out of Seattle. They formed in 2007. Is that correct, Paula?
It sure is.
I just messed up the intro and said she was from Oregon, sister cities. So I am so intrigued by all of your story and excited for your new album, Janus. Can you tell me a little bit about the name of that album? It was your mother's name, and it's also
the Roman god. And goddess.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, for your listeners who don't know, Janus, the Roman god Janus, and some say Janus is male, others say female. So that was kind of cool too. The Janus is known as both a female goddess and male god, is widely thought of as the god of transitions, of doors opening and closing, of chapters beginning and ending. It's why, our first month, January, is named for Janus. And so most of the songs on the album Janus, I wrote or reimagined during this COVID period we're still living in, and this time of what I call the triple pandemics of public health, race, and politics were, kind of the petri dish for me in writing this music. And what COVID did for me, the good thing COVID did for me was it forced me to be quiet. It forced me to spend a lot more time in isolation than I typically do. Typically, I'm zipping around on a plane a lot, just moving constantly. And I couldn't do that with COVID. And so I was forced to be with myself, and that led to a lot of introspection, and in my case, thinking about ancestry, those who came before me, their journeys and sacrifices that lead me to being me. It really was a time that took me back to different memory sparks in my life, things in my childhood and early adulthood. Those find their way into this music. And also a celebration of the gifts I enjoy, including having been with the same person for over 30 years. So all of that is packaged together in an album called Janus. And yes, It is my mother's name too.
Yes. It's a really beautiful album that touches on everything you just said. And when you're talking about your ancestry, I really enjoyed the track King Brewster, which was about your great-great-grandfather.
Actually, even farther back than that.
Great.
I think he, King Brewster, was my grandfather's grandfather.
Okay.
Something like that. Yeah.
I tried to figure it out when you said your daddy's daddy at the beginning.
It works out to, my daddy's daddy's daddy. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, I think it's great or great. All the details in that story, were those passed down through your family? How did you learn so much about that history?
Oh my God. And part of the, sort of the magic of that song for me is I knew none of it before the pandemic. Zero.
Wow.
Essentially what happened was shortly after people started sheltering in place, my sister called me and said, "You'll never believe this, but I got this call from this lawyer in Alabama, and he was asking if I was a child of Nathaniel Boggs, our deceased father." And she said, "Yeah, I'm one of 4 children." And he said, "Well, we're trying to figure out the estate of King Brewster and his heirs." And as it turns out, I don't address this in the song, but King Brewster was married 4 times. And so there are tons of heirs. I mean, there are hundreds of people who are heirs to this guy. And as it turned out, I guess Alabama is going through a process of repatriation. Okay. In the sense that, lands that were stolen from people during, the Jim Crow era or because of other stuff, they're trying to make that right. Okay. So
that's good to know. I had no clue that was happening.
So that's happening
right
in Alabama. And I don't know how widespread, but it is happening in Alabama. And another great thing about that state is its records from the 18th and 19th century are far better than what you can get from a number of other southern states. And so my sister was able to, through this lawyer and, her research through ancestry.com, she was able to find out a lot about King. I mean, for example, she learned when and where he was born, who his father was, who his mother was, who this half brother was who fought in the Confederate Army. She found the will of that white half brother. And so that's how she learned that he had willed King a pocket watch at his death. Right. Wow. And with that, I was able to find other documents in Alabama records. For example, I've seen the slave ledgers where, King is listed among, pigs and cattle and other livestock as property of this guy who was his father. And, I found, the first record of King voting, which was 1867, just 2 years after the end of the Civil War, right? So he voted right away.
Wow.
And so, the other facts of, that come up in the song were, the result of research and serendipity. So, yeah.
Wow. I really was drawn into that song. I listened to it multiple times and I'm like, I wonder how she found out all these details. That's so interesting. What an amazing story. And it's interesting to me to find out that Alabama's doing that. And you talked about how a lot of the records are not really well done for that time. Because I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we're just now openly speaking about the Tulsa race massacres that happened here and trying to find the graves of all these people that when they burned down Black Wall Street here. And I hope that they uncover some things and that reparations are in order for the people of Tulsa. That's something that I'm really passionate about. So good to know about Alabama. I'm going to be looking into that more for sure.
Yes.
I know that you have a background in law, which is probably why looking up these documents probably came easy to you, right?
Easier than for some, I suspect.
I find it impressive and something that I look up to, that you quit your corporate job with Starbucks as the lead counsel to pursue music, as a passionate music fan and someone who has a lot of family in corporate America and just like working to the bone and not pursuing their passions. That's something I just am always so proud of people when they make that step. What was it like making that step for you? What did your friends or your peers or your partner think? And how did you feel? And how do you feel now that you've done that?
Yeah, and so there, in that question, there are a lot of different
a lot of ways.
reactions, but no, let's take them one by one. And I'll start with the most important, who is my spouse, right? And Randy is an artist, an amazing artist and fine artist in her own right, and she did something similar 20 plus years ago. We moved from the Pacific Northwest to Texas for a job for me. And she had a pretty highfalutin job here in Seattle that she gave up to come with me to Texas. But what that did was it ignited for her the ability to do her own art for the first time, because she was doing the art for other people. Right. And newspapers and whatnot, and getting paid for that. But you make the art somebody tells you to make, right? And so for the first time, she was making her own art, and she returned to a childhood passion that she had abandoned, which was horseback riding. So all of these things had happened for her 20 years ago. And so when I started sharing with her this passion to leave law, she was 100% supportive. She said, "You were so supportive of me when I made those leaps. It's your turn now." So let's start with that. So yes, that's a really important, champion in my life journey to now is, I've had this supportive spouse who, was 100%, behind, the decision to do what I'm doing now. And who, as an artist herself, understands the really almost physical magnet need to create art and share it, and for her, it's, her drawings and her paintings. And for me, it's what I do. So I had that. It was interesting how Starbucks reacted to it. And I think, and net, it was supportive. Starbucks is a sort of place, at least it was the 10 years I was there, a place that attracted people who were creative. There were a lot of creative people at Starbucks, people who were musicians and artists and photographers and dancers and all of that stuff, right? And so as I was reacquainting myself with a passion for music, I was in this place where, as people learned about it, people were intrigued and supportive of it. The people who worked for me, my peers, and my boss. So I'm actually not even sure I would be back to music this way had I not been at a place like Starbucks, where I was surrounded by others who had creative impulses too, and were finding outlets beyond the workplace to satisfy the artist within, right?
Right.
And then there's the conversation with my boss, which my spouse and I rehearsed for about 6 months, how that was going to go down, what that conversation was going to be like, because I really didn't want anyone at Starbucks to feel as if I was rejecting Starbucks. It wasn't about Starbucks. I was leaving Starbucks, but I was also leaving law. I was closing a chapter, and this was sort of the last pages of a chapter I was closing and beginning a new one, apropos Janus, right? So I kind of nailed that performance because they sent me off in the most beautiful way, and I only have joy for the time I was at Starbucks when I think back on it. But it was time. I had accomplished everything I hoped to in law or business. And meanwhile, I had this burgeoning, growing obsession, really, with music that was not letting me go. And I had to do something about it. And by the time I left Starbucks, Paula Boggs' band had been a band for 5 years.
Okay.
And so, it wasn't
it was secret. Rolling. Yeah.
It wasn't a secret that that I was doing this. And we had already released our first album by the time I left Starbucks. Still, a lot of people were like, how does that work? I mean, not just people at Starbucks, but, people, in the legal profession, they're looking at me and it's like, how does that happen? I mean, someone takes a step like that because it's very unusual, right?
Yeah.
But I left Starbucks 10 years ago. And now I dare say there's hardly anybody who, is scratching their head, because it just, not that we're like, famous or anything like that, but it is so clear to anybody who knows me or anything about me that this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
It is. And I was going to say that after listening to your album, just the stories that you tell and the words that you use, and honestly, your voice, I love the grit. It's a unique voice. And I always love storytellers And I love people that have unique ways of telling the stories and beautiful voices. I just got off a plane from seeing Mavis Staples perform. And it's not that your voice is like hers, but it has that same emotion and that grit. And it really, and the way she tells stories and things, it just really pulled that together for me. I'm a big fan of Mavis Staples, and now I'm a big fan of yours as well. I'm so glad I was introduced to your music, and I'm glad that people supported you in that change, because I bet it was scary. And I know you probably have tons of musical influences. I listened to your cover of Holocene by Bon Iver, who's one of my favorite artists.
Yes.
What other artists influenced this album? You call your music soulgrass, which is a newer term for me.
Yes.
I heard, elements of jazz in there, bluegrass. And how did that sound come together?
And I think it starts with the music I was exposed to as a child, which was kind of unusual in the following way. So, though I was born in D.C., I spent much of my childhood in segregated Virginia. It was still segregated, and so in the experience I had as a Black kid in segregated Virginia was unusual in the sense that I was also Roman Catholic. So I was attending Catholic school, sometimes the only Black girl in that class. That school was the only integrated school. I was attending it at a time when the Catholic Church was embracing folk music for the first time. So in Catholic Church and school, I would hear a lot of classical Baroque music, which is, part of their church services, but also this burgeoning folk music. And it was, the music of Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul and Mary and Simon and Garfunkel and people like that. And it was actually being played in the church services, these songs, right?
Wow.
So, and then the nuns would play this music in school. And so I was.
Why didn't my nuns play that?
I don't know, but
I was raised Catholic, and that's awesome.
Yeah, mine certainly. It's the reason I was drawn to the guitar in the first place. I don't even know if I would have been drawn to the guitar if I wasn't hearing folk music in elementary school. But it was my dad who was Catholic. My mom was African Methodist Episcopal. And so every other week I'd go to her church, which was not Baroque or folk music. It was all gospel music and spirituals. And I was drawn to that music too, right? And so even, today you can hear the influences of gospel spiritual music. You can hear the influences of the folk music of that era. Because it's imprinted in me. It's tattooed in me. And the other big sort of thing that happened in my childhood was when my folks split up and my mom moved to Europe. And as a teen in Europe, I was exposed to other kinds of classical music, but I was also exposed to jazz for the first time. And some of the jazz I was exposed to wholly transported me. I can still remember when I first heard Keith Jarrett's Colm concert. And I was just 100% transfixed by that music. And part of what made it so for me was it is so emotional. You can hear Keith Jarrett grunting as he's playing the piano, and you can hear the crowd respond to it's because it's a live concert. And I was probably 15 or 16 the first time I heard that, and I was just blown away, and I've actually written about that, and thinking at the time that Keith Jarrett was Black, and learning later in life that Keith Jarrett is white, and posing the question, should that matter, right? And it's an unknowable answer to that question, but yes. So all of those things, I think, you find in our sound.
While we're talking about jazz, I believe it's the last track on the album, Don't Let the Clowns Bring You Down.
Yes.
I thought that was well, first off, when I read the title, I thought of one clown in particular. And I was like, I wonder if that's who this is going to be about. And it was, in part, it was about a lot of stuff that was going on during that presidential time.
Yeah.
And it has that jazz, like ragtime influence, and it kind of makes it sound like clownish. And I just thought that was a really funny song. Can you tell me about your thoughts? I mean, I can gather a lot of them during that time because I was having the same ones like everybody else, watching CNN, watching Fox, and just being like, what planet am I on?
Right.
Can you tell me about writing that song?
Yes, absolutely. So, again, this song was written in that 2020 time frame, and I'm a sort of person who isn't going to be watching a lot of Fox News, but I got incredibly frustrated by CNN because for me, it was like the liberal equivalent of clickbait. And, every time you turned it on, it was like, liar, liar, pants on fire. Everything was a crisis. Everything was high volume. It's like, come on, tone it down, will you? And so it really, forced me to, start looking at non-US news like BBC and stuff like that, because I was like,
to get our news.
Yeah. I mean, because, people were just more calm, and sober in the delivery of the news they were giving. And so, that led me to the, sort of the notion of, CNN and Fox are just two sides of the same coin, right? What's left, what's right, but they utilize, sort of the same techniques in an effort to whip people into a frenzy, and thus, make more money, right? So that, that eureka moment, if you will, was sort of the germ that led to me writing, Don't Let the Clowns Break You Down.
I really love that song. And I love it because it's a serious topic. Like, I have family members that are older where the news to them is quote unquote journalism. I mean, or it was when they were growing up. And so they watch Fox News or they watch CNN and they take that as reality because that's how it was when they were much younger. Mm-hmm. And that's sad and scary. But the way you spun that in this song is just a unique way to make it fun, something that's really serious, fun and funny and a little more lighthearted than they make it. It's a juxtaposition to the way they're so in your face, Yeah. I really loved the way you did that in that track.
Thank you.
While we're speaking about politics, I know you were in the military for 8 years and received some major acclaim while you were in the military. I guess I would be remiss not to ask you about what's going on right now in the Ukraine. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, here's my my overarching thought about what I'm seeing in the Ukraine. I have so much awe and admiration for the Ukrainian people and their president, President Zelensky. And I hope we in the United States are, however this plays out, are taking notes, because at the end of the day, you are seeing ordinary citizens in Ukraine willing to die for their country.
Yes.
They are picking up arms and willing to die for their country. The passion and commitment to this ideal is awe-inspiring. And, we in the United States, some might argue we haven't had that level of passion since the Revolutionary War.
Right, right. Yeah.
And
it's been awe-inspiring and beautiful to watch them.
Yeah. And it's awfully hard to come by in the United States when we're at each other's necks more often than not, and looking for and exploiting things that divide us rather than unite us here in the United States. So here we have front and center this example of a people coming together, and they are under existential threat, and they are not giving up. They are not giving up. They are just, and you see women and men. I mean, everybody is, it's like all hands on deck, right?
Right.
And we in the United States, with all our gifts, hopefully will learn something from this example. It's incredibly inspiring to me.
Right. I find it really beautiful what they're doing, where we had our people taking over the Capitol and fighting against our country. And we had the clown. Do you think the clown would be standing there with his country and being there on the front lines? I can't think of anyone in recent time that would lead our nation that way. And it's just incredible to watch.
It really is.
I hate to keep going off topic from your music, but I'm just so interested in your background. I want to know your thoughts on things.
Yes.
We'll get back to the music for a minute. Another track I really loved was Motel 6 Serenade.
Yes.
I'm going to turn this into a Sweet 16 Cosmopolitan interview now. Did you ever find the person you were singing to in that track? It was a beautiful song. You're singing about someone you knew in high school. I don't know if it was a friend or a love interest or whatnot. Maybe you can fill me in on that. And you were trying to find them. Did you find them? And how did that turn out?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because I have shared that song with friends from Vicenza American High School. And, sort of the memory spark comes from being 16 and in Vicenza, Italy. When I first wrote, this is an example of a song I tried writing over a long period of time. When I first started it, I was literally in a Motel 6 in Phoenix.
Right.
And it was before social media. It was before, the, sort of civilian use of the internet. Even.
Right. I was going to ask, were you really looking at the white pages, and how long ago was this?
And it's, it's like, and so, part of what that song is the culmination of tension between the 20-something me who first started writing that song and the today me who has the benefit of a rear view of what, a life journey has been since I first started writing that song. I did find that person through, the joy of social media. And, what I now understand, part of the emotion around that song, and I didn't understand it at the time, but I was struggling with my own sexuality when I was writing that song initially. And I met the love of my life a year or so later. So, and I'm still with her. So,
right.
So one of the subtexts, I guess, of that song is that, the fear, the unwillingness to even, spell it out in a song or a diary because, it's too scary. Right.
Right.
And so that emotion, that impulse, I think, really does, inform sort of, the emotion of that song. And, having said that, Emily, I couldn't, it was hard to finish that song. It was hard to figure it out from a songwriting standpoint. And so I ended up just throwing up my hands. I mean, I knew the lyrics. I knew what I wanted to say in the song, but I didn't know the right, I couldn't figure out the right melody and arrangement for that song. And so I threw my hands up. I tossed it to our keyboardist, accordion player, Paul Matthew Moore. And I said, Paul, you're an accomplished composer, among other things. You figure it out. And he said, okay. And so the arrangement on Janus is Paul's arrangement. And,
okay.
And what there were so many things about it I love, but among them is it took it out of this. I mean, when I was writing this song, it was just in this sort of dark, deep, melancholy place. And what Paul did was he lightened it. I mean, it's still, an emotional song, but he lightened it up.
Right.
And it's got kind of, sort of a Beatles, Sgt. Peppery element to it. And it's, danceable and,
yes.
And so I'm just really grateful that through a collaborative process, we ended up there. And then at the end of the song, I said to the producer, Tucker Martine, I said, wait a minute. Okay, we got to soul grass this song up a bit, right? So that, that it fits, into this body of work better. And so at the end of the song, you hear, the banjo and the lap steel kind of take it out to, the end of the song. And I thought, wow, that's perfect because, if you're listening to it as an album, but, it works even if, you're just listening to it as a single. But if you're listening to it as an album, the very next thing you hear is Gigging for the Angels. And it's a really nice segue.
Transition. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I listened to the album all the way through. And then there was a few I went back and listened to again and again. And I loved the way it flowed through. I would say Motel 6 Serenade is probably my very favorite song. I felt like it really, and knowing that you wrote it when you were much younger, right after that time.
Yeah.
Well, actually hearing all of this, you have no idea how excited I am to go back and listen again, because I felt like it captured the way I felt as a teenager or, it really just captured that so well. And I just loved it. I have those same kind of emotions towards certain people from those years of my life too. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it was so beautifully done. So that's one now that I know the backstory, going to go give it a listen again. I want all the listeners, when your album drops, to definitely check that one out. It's certainly a favorite of mine. Okay, so I'm going to actually transition back to your time in the military. I guess, for me, that was not, I've always been a fan of music and more of an artsy person. And I never saw military as a path for me. And hearing what a beautiful poet you are, it just seems like a weird juxtaposition to me that you ended up in the military. How did that happen? And as a Black queer woman in the military, what was that like for you in that experience? And how does that maybe play into your music in some ways, that strength?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. And first, I think I want to give a shout out to all those musicians in the military. Most people don't know sort of the organization with the largest concentration of classical musicians is actually the U.S. military.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So
I would never know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to give a shout out to all those who serve, who are also musicians, but that's not my story. I ended up in the military. I think it's a classic case of, situational opportunity. When we moved to Europe, my mom was a teacher for the Department of Defense school system. So, her students were the children of military personnel stationed in Germany. And then we moved to Italy. Parenthetically, as I talked to my friends from that period of my life, we're all in awe that, when we were kids, the only reason we were in Europe was because our parents were fighting Soviet aggression. I mean, that was the only reason we were there. And here we are, all these many years later. And, they're now calling themselves Russians rather than Soviets, right. But it's the same thing. It's really the same thing. Right. But back to me in the military. As a teen, I was living on these military installations in Europe, and I was, I had good grades and I was an athlete. And so for, people like that, it was really a common thing to apply to the military academies, to apply to reserve officer training, to get the military to pay for your college at a civilian school. There was nothing extraordinary about that. I mean, so many of my friends were also doing that. And so I did it too. And, for me, that led to me going to a college that, but for the military paying for it, I would not have been able to afford going there. And sort of the quid pro quo was, we pay for your college, you give us 4 years of your life. Right. was the bargain. And so, I signed up for that, and the military paid for my college. I went on to law school, and then, I gave them, my 4 years. And so that's how, that happened. Now you asked, what was it like as, because they're not the same thing. How was it like as a Black woman? How was it like as a queer woman? Okay. So yes. As a Black woman, okay, we're talking the second term of Ronald Reagan. So, I mean, I could go for weeks without seeing another Black professional woman in the Pentagon, wow, or in the White House where I was working. It was unusual, actually, for me to run into another professional Black woman. So often I was, and so I learned very quickly how to navigate that situation. of being the only in a room. And I'm glad I had that opportunity in my 20s because those skills have served me well ever since. Now, in terms of being a queer woman, I refused to go there. I would not allow myself to explore that part of who I was. I shut down. I denied it. I went through, a masquerade of being straight. And it was not until I left the military and I met Randy that my life was forever changed. But even with that, it took another several years for me to gain the confidence to be myself in the workplace. And, I think the beauty of that story, one of the most beautiful things about it is it happened after when we left Seattle for Texas. And so, Seattle often gets, the reputation of being this liberal bastion, and Texas, has this reputation of being very conservative. But for our story, we left liberal Seattle, moved to Texas, and it was in Texas that for the first time as a couple, we were a couple, out and proud, 24/7, and everybody knew us as a couple. Now, it was Austin. Okay. And some people will tell you Austin is not Texas and Texas is not Austin.
Right.
But nonetheless, that's where it happened. That's when we became and I became my full self. And so the irony is after 5 years, we returned to Seattle, and a lot of people were meeting Randy for the first time. And they're like, what? Kind of thing. It's like, yeah, because, once you're out of the closet, or at least, in my life journey, there was no way in hell I was ever returning to the closet. And so that was that.
And do you think that those experiences, I mean, obviously they do affect your music, but how much is that a part of your music, or you just have such a wealth of knowledge? I feel like you've lived so many lives. I'm like just fascinated by everything. I wish I could talk to you for 3 hours, but what parts of that play into your music? And are there specific songs? I haven't checked out your back catalog yet, but that's something I'm going to do. What songs would you recommend? Maybe I could check out.
Yeah, I think it absolutely affects the music I write and how I share it, how I perform it. I mean, one of my journeys as a musician has been to find or attempt to find my most authentic voice, and it's literally, it's literally how I sound. And I think I have, I don't think I'll ever be there. It's an ongoing life journey, that quest for your authentic voice. But I'm more there now, Emily, than I've ever been. And I think a part of, quote, the authentic voice must necessarily be living an authentic life, right? And so in that way, my music has evolved and become more at peace with who I am, the more I have embraced who I am, if that makes sense.
That's beautiful.
And, In terms of my back catalog, I think I have become a better storyteller over time because I have been more willing over time to say, this is who I am. This is my voice. And, critics be damned. This is it.
Me.
Right. This is me. And so I can't really point to a specific song.
I'm going to go back and listen to them all probably anyway. It's okay.
But I think if you look at it as a continuum, in an artist's journey, the most personal, the most authentic music in the entire catalog is the music of Janus.
Right. I feel like I know you from it. So that was intimidating to me to speak to you today, just because it's odd, just like talking to someone you feel like you just read their diary, and it's like you don't know me at all, and I'm going to come in and ask you all these questions. It's so bizarre because you really lay your heart out on that album, and I'm so excited for the release for you and for the listeners of this podcast. It drops on April 1st. Are you doing anything to celebrate that? Are you touring? What do you have in the works that we can look forward to?
Yes. So we had a what we called a pre-release show here in Seattle about 10 days ago, and it was just an amazingly wonderful moment of joy. We're heading to the San Francisco Bay Area in a couple weeks to do the same thing, and then immediately after the release, I think we've got a couple of smaller shows in this region scheduled, but we're waiting word from a number of festivals and also importantly, one location on the East Coast that, if it comes through, will build an East Coast, tour around that. Now, you told me you're in Oklahoma. We've never played Oklahoma, but we love the South. And in the journey of Paula Boggs band, we've played South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama a number of times, Tennessee, Texas, certainly. And what we have found is we love the South. In some ways, particularly when you're talking about places like, I remember when we were in Memphis and Mobile, Alabama, we've been a couple times now. People just get our music,
right,
in ways that, perhaps even people in Seattle don't get it the same way. Some of the audiences in the South have just like really gravitated to our music. And I don't know quite why that is. I don't know if it's because of the folk, bluegrass, jazz elements and how it comes together in ways that really resonate with Southern audiences. I don't know if it's the storytelling aspect of it that, tends to resonate more powerfully. But we love the South, and we, my ancestral roots are in the South, in both Georgia and Alabama. On both sides of my family, my ancestors were enslaved. And so literally the soil of the South is my soil, right?
Right.
And it comes out in different ways in the music, I write and what we play. So yeah, I look forward to it. And I look forward to someday playing Oklahoma.
Yeah, you got to come through. We have something here called the Tulsa Sound, which was made popular by Leon Russell.
I love his music.
Leon Russell's incredible.
Leon music.
We had people like George Harrison, Tom Petty. Lots of people have recorded here, and we've got a really cool music scene. They're really the city itself is investing in paying artists more. And we've got the Bob Dylan Museum that's going in here with hundreds of thousands of his artifacts. It's just a really cool sound and scene that's going on here right now. And I think your music would fit right in. If you come, you should play the Mercury Lounge here. So
okay,
you need to write that down and get a tour date there for me, because I'm going to come and I'm going to tell everybody to go. With that said, I just really want to thank you for being on the show with me today. I feel like this interview was a little less congruent than most of my interviews, but that's because you just have so many interesting aspects of your life. And I'm just fascinated reading about your life and listening to your music. I also read that you are writing a novel, or not a novel, but writing a book right now. Can you tell us some details on that book? And
Sure.
Is it about all of this crazy stuff you've experienced in your life, or is it something else?
Well, I feel a bit. I heard Brandy Carlisle talk about her memoir and sort of the relationship between writing that memoir and the album she just put out. And I feel what she said, what I heard her say, very much resonated with me, because I feel exactly the same, in the sense that I'm not sure if I could have written the music of Janus without simultaneously also working on a memoir, because, memoir really forces you to, to be your personal editor. I mean, you're not, it's not going to be a successful memoir if you're writing in a style of, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. I mean, people don't want to read that, right? That's not, unless you're someone really, really famous and people want to read your autobiography. That's not what memoir is. Memoir is the author offering sort of a point of view that is informed by, these sparks in the author's life, right? And so in that way, the album Janus and this memoir I'm still trying to write are, they are part of the same thing.
Okay.
And so I'll leave it there.
What did I tell you? This woman has seen and done so many amazing things. I mean, what a badass. To live so big and bold, to give up on a secure path to follow a musical career, to follow her passions. Such an impressive artist. Again, the album Janus is out on April 1st. Get a good set of headphones and just listen to it the whole way through. Of course, you can Google Paula Boggs or find more info about her at paulaboggsband.net. Keep an eye out for some tour dates. I know I'll be doing so as well. And be sure to follow her on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you do the social media stuff. It's an excellent way to keep up with your favorite artists and support them. I'm Emily. I'll see you back here next time.